Hester Coombe counted £6 in laundry pennies onto the vestry table. A coin for every year the garden had gone unlet. She stacked them slow, the way a woman stacks coins she has earned with her hands. And the trustees of the Marlbrook Almshouse did not trouble to hide their smiles. She did not colour. She only asked for the key to the far wall. Before the 12 men of the vestry, Chairman Josiah Fenwick signed the conveyance. He dipped his pen. He smiled at his own wit before he spoke it. £6 and good riddance, he said. There is nothing behind that wall but nettles and the parish's shame. Not one of the 12 had walked past that gate in 9 years. Then came the winter, a bramble-hook and a burning heap. A woman working alone, from the gate inward, day after cold day. And against the last south wall, under bramble grown up past her shoulder, she found something. Something the pensioners had built with their own hands. Something the reforms had forgotten. If you believe old hands know things young eyes can't see, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and stay with me to the end of this one, and do me a small kindness. Comment the county or the country you're watching from. I want to see how far a story about £6 of pennies can travel. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Farleigh Coombe was a small parish in the folded green of Somerset, and Hester Coombe washed its linen. She was a widow, 44, with strong forearms and a straight back and a face that had stopped expecting favours. Her yard faced north. That was the trouble. That was the whole of the trouble. A north yard never sees the sun square on. The wall stays cold. The stone holds the damp instead of drinking it. In the fine weeks, it hardly mattered. She could hang her lines and let the wind do its work, and the gentlefolk's shirts came in dry and sweet by evening. But Somerset does not keep fine weeks. It keeps rain. And in the wet weeks the linen hung grey and heavy on the lines, and dripped, and would not dry, and dripped again. A laundress who cannot dry cannot take fresh custom. That was the arithmetic of her life. The rector's wife would send her sheets to Hester on a Monday, and if by Thursday they were still sour on the line, she would send them elsewhere the Monday after. Wet weeks cost her custom. Custom did not come back easy once it had learned another door. So Hester wanted a warm wall. That was all. That is where this begins. Not with ambition. With a warm wall and the sun on it. You should know what kind of woman she was before the important men open their mouths. Because they will, and when they do, you'll want to have taken her measure first. Old Mercy Yeo lived in the next village over at Wexcombe in a cottage the size of a byre. Mercy had been an almshouse widow once. Before the almshouse closed, she had run the harvest there in her strong years, though Hester did not yet know what harvest that was. Now Mercy's hands were knotted with the rheumatism, and she could not wring a cloth to save her life. And every second week, wet or dry, Hester walked Mercy's washing back from Wexcombe, cleaned it, dried it as best her poor yard allowed, and carried it home again. She never took a penny for it. She never spoke of it. When the neighbours asked why she troubled herself over a woman with nothing, Hester only said that the old woman had no one, and that a body still liked clean sheets, whether they were poor or no. That is the woman. Hold on to her. Now, the Marlbrook Almshouse had closed 2 years back. There had been new arrangements under the poor law, new gentlemen with new opinions, and the old almshouse with its dozen pensioners was judged a waste and a muddle. The pensioners were turned out. Dispersed, the gentlemen called it, as if they were smoke. Scattered to cottages in 3 villages, an old man here, an old widow there, each to be kept cheaper apart than they had been kept together. The building was shut. The garden behind it, a good walled plot, went unlet. 9 years, some said, since anything was grown there. Longer, the bramble had the run of it, the nettle had the rest, and when the trust came to tidy its books, the garden was written down in the ledger as waste ground. Waste ground of no value to the charity. Those were the words. Remember them. Everything turns on them. It was the churchwarden's boy who told Hester the plot was to be sold. She was pegging out at the time, and the shirt in her hands hung heavy as a dead thing, and she looked up at the grey sky and thought of the south wall of the Marlbrook garden. She had passed it 100 times on the Wexcombe Road, 12 feet of old dressed stone, facing full south, drinking the sun all the long afternoon. A wall like that would dry a shirt in half the hours her north yard took. In half. She did not have much. She had a widow's savings kept in a stocking. She counted it that night by the candle, in pennies and small silver, and it came to a little over £6, and she counted it twice more to be sure the counting had not lied. She went to the vestry with 6 of those pounds. She took them in pennies. Perhaps that was pride, and perhaps it was only what she had, but she took the coins in a laundry bag, and she counted them onto the table one at a time. You have heard how that went. You heard the smiles. You heard Fenwick's line about nettles and shame. What you did not yet hear is what came before it, in the quiet, when the deed was drawn and the men were talking among themselves as though she were a chair. She had asked for the key to the far wall. Fenwick had waved a hand. The whole plot, key and all, was hers for her £6, and welcome to it. And he had turned to the man beside him, the Reverend Aldous Pring, and said something low. And both had smiled the smile of men who have made a small, clever bargain and want a witness to admire it. Hester took her key. She signed her mark. She was a landowner now, of a sort, for the first time in her life, of a rood of bramble that 12 gentlemen agreed was worth nothing. She went to look at it the same afternoon. The gate was half off its hinge and grown through with bindweed, and she had to lift it and drag it to get in. Inside was worse than she had thought, and better. Worse, because the bramble was chest-high and shoulder-high, and in places over her head a great tangled sea of it, thorned and dead brown with winter. Better, because when she looked past all that to the far side, there it was. The south wall. Long and high and true, the stone gone gold-grey in the low sun, warm to the flat of her hand even in December. She stood with her palm against it and felt the day's little heat still living in it, and she smiled for the first time that week. It was as she turned to go, working out already where the posts for her lines would drive, that she noticed the cupboards. That is how she thought of them. Little stone cupboards, built right into the thickness of the far wall, a whole row of them, arched at the top like small church windows laid on their side. Most were half choked with bramble and packed with old dead leaves, and you could hardly see they were there. Some old fancy of the almsfolk, she thought, some notion of the old people, cupboards in a wall, to keep what? Garden tools, flower pots, who could say? She did not give it a second thought. She had a wall to clear and a living to drag out of it, and a row of odd stone niches was no business of hers. She turned the key in her pocket like a small warm secret and went home to sharpen her hook. Understand this, because the whole tale hangs on it. She saw them. She stood not 6 feet from them. And she, like every soul in the parish, looked straight at the thing and did not read it. The difference between Hester and the 12 gentlemen is not that she was cleverer that day, it is that she came back. She came back every day, all winter, and did the work. And the work reads the ground for you, if you'll only do it long enough. She began the next morning at the gate and worked inward. It is hard to tell you how hard that work was without you feeling it in your own arms. Bramble does not want to leave the ground. It roots as it runs. Every long cane is hooked with 100 small thorns that catch the sleeve and catch the skin and catch the next cane, so that when you pull one you pull a raft of them, and they come with a green groan and a spray of old dead leaves and a scattering of whatever has been living underneath. She wore her husband's old coat and a pair of hedger's gloves gone stiff as boards, and still by the first evening her wrists were laced with red scratches, and still she went back the second morning, and the third. She cut, and she dragged, and she burned. A heap in the middle of the plot fed all day, sending up a thin grey line of smoke that the whole parish could see, and did. And the parish talked. Of course it talked. A laundress with a spade, a woman on waste ground, alone day after day in a man's coat, with a bramble-hook in her fist and a fire going. They came to their gates to watch her pass on the road. They spoke behind their hands. Some pitied her that the widow Coombe had thrown her savings into a briar patch and gone half-cracked with it. Some laughed. What did a washerwoman want with a garden? What would she grow? Dirty shirts. She heard some of it and guessed the rest, and it changed her stride not 1 inch. She had a wall to reach. It was in the second week, deep into the first great bank of bramble, that she found the baskets. That is what she took them for. She had cleared down to the old soil in a stretch near the middle, and under the dead canes, half sunk into the ground and rotted soft with the years, were the round, broken shapes of them. Domes of woven straw, coiled straw, some the size of a beehive, most caved in and gone to black mould, threaded through and through with bramble root. She pulled one up and it came apart in her hands like wet bread. Dozens of them she found as she worked that stretch. Old straw baskets, she thought, the kind country people coil from wheat straw, gone to ruin under the briars. She threw the worst on the fire, and they burned with a fat, sweet, waxy smoke that she noticed without understanding, and she stacked a few of the sounder ones by the gate, thinking they might do to carry pegs, or hold kindling, or serve some small use about the yard. Waste not. She did not know she was holding the almshouse's dead in her hands. She did not know those broken domes had once stood in the sun, full of bees and full of gold. Not yet. That knowledge was still a month off, and it would come slow, the way true knowledge comes, one uncovered thing at a time. You see how the value surfaces, not in a shout, in a woman throwing 100-year secret onto a bonfire because no one alive had told her what it was. By the turn of the year, she had cut a broad path clear through the middle of the plot, and the burning heap had eaten an acre of bramble, and she had reached at last the foot of the south wall, and it was there, in the shelter of that warm stone, that the tale turns for good. The bramble grew thickest against the south wall, because that was the sweetest ground, and it had guarded the wall like a thorn hedge set on purpose. She cut into it a whole cold week, and as she cut, the row of little stone cupboards came clear, one by one, uncovered down their whole length. She counted them as she cleared them, the way a woman counts anything to keep her mind steady at hard work. And when the last was free of briar, she stood back and counted the row entire. 40 little arched niches, set in 2 long courses the length of the wall, each one a good foot deep and shaped snug, as though built to hold one round thing and no other, and in a good third of them, safe in the shelter, out of the weather all these years, sat a straw dome, whole, not rotted, coiled tight and brown and sound, tucked into its stone niche like an egg in a cup. She stood and looked at 40 niches and did not understand them, but something in her had begun to. The care of it. No one builds 40 matched cupboards into a wall for baskets. No one shelters straw so tenderly for nothing. She reached out and touched one of the whole domes in its niche, and it was warm, warmer than the stone, and it hummed under her fingers. It hummed. She snatched her hand back. And then, because she was not a woman to run from a thing she did not understand, she stood very still and watched. It was a mild afternoon, one of those false soft days February sometimes throws down in the middle of the cold, and out of a small round hole in the base of that straw dome, one at a time, came bees. Slow, winter stiff, blinking into the low sun. They crawled to the lip of the niche. They lifted. They flew, bees alive in February. In her wall. She understood then, all at once and yet not at all, what she had bought. Not baskets, Skeps, bee skeps, the old straw kind her grandmother would have known, and the little stone cupboards were bee bowls, made to hold them out of wind and wet, and the almsfolk who built this wall had built it for bees. She had bought a garden full of them and burned their dead on a bonfire without knowing their name. She worked the live ones over the next many days, careful now, gentle as with a sleeping child, tapping each whole skep, laying her ear to the straw, listening for the hum. Most were silent. Most had died, some winter or other in the 9 long years, and gone cold and empty in their niches. But not all. Not all. When she had listened to every one of the 40, she had her count, and she wrote it down that night, and the number of it kept her awake. 11 of the skeps were still alive, 11 colonies of bees shut behind a wall, over a garden gone to jungle, feeding themselves off the wild flowers of 9 years of neglect, swarming and dying and swarming again, gone half wild in the ruin, left for dead by 12 gentlemen who signed them away for £6. And living yet. That is the first count. Keep it in your mind. 40 bowls, 11 alive. Because that count is going to rise rung by rung, and there are men in this parish who are going to wish to God they had walked to the far wall just once in 9 years. She could not keep such a thing quiet, and she did not try. Word of the humming wall went round the parish the way such words do, and the gawking at her gate grew worse. And it was in that season, with her handling the skeps at the wall in broad day, that the Reverend Aldous Pring found her out. He was passing on the Wexcombe Road in his trap, and he saw her at the wall with a skep lifted in her 2 hands, and he stopped his horse, and he rebuked her from the lane. He did not trouble to come in at the gate. He called it over the wall, so that the 2 labourers passing could hear, and the woman at the pump and God. It was not seemly, he said, for a woman of her station to be keeping stock. A labouring widow, playing at husbandry, meddling with bees like a farmer's wife with land of her own. It gave the parish a wrong idea of itself. It was above her place, and it was unbecoming, and he would thank her to remember what she was. Hester stood at the wall, with the skep in her hands, and the bees moving quiet over her wrists, and she did not answer him back. She only looked at him until he was done, and then she said, mild as milk, that she was much obliged for his concern, and that the bees seemed content enough with her keeping of them. And she turned to her work. And the Reverend Aldous Pring drove on with his face gone red, because there is nothing so galling to a man who has come to scold as a woman who will not be scolded. He told Fenwick of it that same evening over the chairman's good port, and Fenwick laughed. Hester heard the shape of it later, the way you always hear these things. The chairman had leaned back and laughed, and said the washerwoman was welcome to her wasps, and that a woman who would pay £6 for a briar patch would believe anything hummed gold, and that they had done well, very well, to be shut of the place and the pensioners and the whole tiresome muddle at a stroke, welcome to her wasps. 12 gentlemen laughed at that over their wine. I want you to hold that sentence, and I want you to hold the count. 40 bowls. 11 alive. Because the day is coming, and it is not far off now, when a man will stand at that wall and see the 2 of them side by side, his own laugh and the living count, and there will be no port in the world sweet enough to take the taste away. She made herself a veil. The bees were kind enough in the cold, but the year was warming, and she was not fool enough to work stinging stock bare-faced. She had no bee hat and no money for one, so she made it the only way she knew. She sewed it from laundry net, the fine net she used for the delicate work gathered onto the brim of an old straw hat and tied close at the throat. And so the parish, filing past her gate on a Sunday to gawk on their way from church, saw the widow Coombe standing at her humming wall in a man's coat and a veil sewn from washing net, calm as a queen among her 40 stone cupboards, while 11 colonies of bees moved gold about her head. Some laughed at that too. Let them. She had stopped hearing it. She was reading her wall. Here the whole feeling of the thing changes, and I want you to feel it change. Up to now it has been a tale of a woman gawked at and scolded and cheated of her due respect. From here it becomes something harder and better. It becomes the tale of a woman finding out, slow and sure, exactly how badly the important men had misjudged and exactly what they had thrown away. The pain does not vanish. It hardens into resolve. And the ground keeps giving up its secrets. The next was in the old potting shed. It stood in the corner of the plot, half fallen, its roof gone to green moss and its door hanging, and she had left it till last because a fallen shed held no sun for drying linen. But a wet week came and drove her under cover, and she spent it clearing the shed, and in the shed, on a shelf gone black with damp, wrapped in a scrap of oiled cloth that had just saved it, she found the book. It was a ledger, old, thick, the leather soft with handling, the pages foxed brown. And when she opened it at the shed door for the light and began to read, the winter went out of her and something else came in. It was the Almshouse bee book, 100 years of it, near enough, kept in a dozen different hands as one old beeman handed it down to the next. Column after column. Dates of swarms, spring and summer, going back to a time before her grandmother. The weight of each skep taken at the harvest, marked in pounds, skep by skep, year by year. And beside the weights, in a careful hand, the money, what the honey had fetched at Wells Market, what the wax had fetched, and the wax always fetched the more, and what that money bought. There it was, set down plain, year on year on year. Coal money for the Almshouse fires. So many hundredweight of coal bought out of the bees to keep the old pensioners warm through the winters of 100 years. Hester sat down on the broken step of the potting shed, with the book open on her knees, and understood, at last and entire, what she had bought for £6. Not a garden, not a warm wall and a place to dry shirts. She had bought a working apiary. A trade, 100-year-old going concern that had fed and warmed the poor of this parish out of its own straw skeps since before any man now living was born. The bees had bought the coal. The bees had kept the old folk from the cold. And the trust, the charity, the 12 careful gentlemen, sworn to husband the almshouses every farthing, had shut the almshouse and turned out the pensioners and sold the very engine that paid for their fires, sold it as waste ground of no value, for £6 to a laundress who only wanted a wall. They had not stolen it from the poor. That would almost have been better. They had thrown it away. They had thrown it away because not one of the 12 had ever, in 9 years, walked the length of his own boundary to the far wall. She closed the book. She sat a long while, and what rose in her then was not triumph. It was too big and too sad for triumph. It was the plain, hard knowledge that she now held in her 2 washerwoman's hands the living income of a charity that had judged it worthless, and that she had better learn, and learn quick, and learn right, how to work it. Because 11 colonies gone half wild in a ruin are not a trade. Not yet. They are a chance, and a chance wants knowing hands. She did not know a beeman's craft. She knew how the skeps hummed and how the bees came out in the sun, and no more than that. And the man who had kept this book, whoever's was the last careful hand in it, was gone with all the rest. Scattered to a cottage somewhere, if he lived at all. So she asked. Quietly, on her rounds, carrying washing from village to village, she asked after the old Almshouse folk. Who had been the beeman at Marlbrook? Where had he gone? Did he live? And an old woman at Wexcombe, Mercy Yeo herself, the very woman Hester had carried washing for all these years without a penny, set down her tea and said, "Why, that would be Reuben Tucker." And he was not dead at all. He was living yet with his niece over at Bishop's Combe, and he had wept, Mercy said, wept like a child the day they turned him out, because he'd said the bees would die without him, and no one would care that they had. Hester walked to Bishop's Combe the next fine day. She found the cottage. She found the old man in the doorway in the sun, 78 if he was a day, his hands gone to horn, and his eyes gone pale, and she told him who she was and what she had bought and what she had found humming in the far wall. And Reuben Tucker took hold of the door-jamb to keep his feet, and his old face broke, and he wept there in the doorway in the sun, the second time in this tale that a strong soul has wept. And he said the words that closed the first great question of it, and opened the next. "You mean to tell me," he said, "that some of them are living yet?" After 9 years. "My bees are living yet." And Hester said 11 of them were, and that she had come to beg him to teach her to keep them, because she did not know the craft, and she would not see them die twice for want of it. The old man wiped his face with the back of one horned hand. He looked at this washerwoman standing in his lane, this stranger who had bought his life's work by accident for £6, and walked 4 miles to ask him to save it. And he said he would come. He said he had thought the knowing of it would die with him, that he was the last, that no one would ever want the old skepcraft again in this world of new notions. He said he had made his peace with dying useless, and now here was a woman at his gate telling him the bees were living yet, and asking to be taught. He came back with her that very afternoon, slow on the road, leaning on her arm the last mile. And when he came in at the broken gate and saw the cleared plot and the long south wall standing free of bramble at last, the 40 bowls bare to the light and 11 of them humming in the low gold sun, the old man stopped dead on the path. He walked to the wall. He put his hand flat on the stone between 2 niches, the way Hester herself had done on that first December afternoon, and he began to name them, not the bees, the bowls. He walked the row and laid his hand on each stone cupboard in turn, and he named the man who had built it, and the year near enough that it was set, 1 old pensioner and 1 long-dead summer at a time, 40 niches down the warm south wall. He stopped at one, near the middle, worn smoother than the rest. He stood a long moment with his hand on it. "This one," Reuben Tucker said, and his old voice had gone thick. "This one here, missus. This is a proper bee-bowlay, this is. My own grandfather set this stone, 100-year-old this wall, and more." He turned and looked at her with his pale, wet eyes. "And them gentlemen sold it for £6. As waste ground." He said the words slow, tasting how wrong they were. As waste ground of no value. He turned back to the humming wall, and he was quiet a while, and then he said, "The thing that hung over the whole rest of the winter, the thing I am going to leave you with, because the answer to it is where everything after this begins." "There's a book," Reuben Tucker said. "There was always a book, 100 years of weights and prices in it, if it lived. Missus, if you've truly got that book, and you've truly got 11 stocks living on this wall, then you'd best sit down, for you don't know yet what you're standing on. You've not the first idea what this'll be worth, come the summer, when we work it right." And Hester Coombe, laundress, 44, stood at the humming wall in her veil of washing net beside the last beeman of Marlbrook, and did not yet know either. But she would. And so, before those 12 gentlemen were done, would every soul in the parish of Farleigh Coombe. The first honey came out of the wall in the 2nd week of a warm May. Reuben Tucker came back for it as he'd promised. His niece drove him the 4 miles in a borrowed trap, and he climbed down at the gate stiff, as an old gate himself, 78 years in his knees, and he stood a moment and listened to the wall before he'd let Hester say a word. "They're strong," he said. "Hear that note? That's a strong stock. That's a stock with more than it needs." He nodded, slow. "Right, we'll take from the heavy ones. We leave the light ones be. A beeman that takes too much has no bees the next year, and no sense either." He showed her the way of it. Not fast. Nothing about Reuben was fast. He showed her how to read the weight of a skep by lifting the back of it a finger's width off the bowl, how a heavy one held its ground and a light one came up easy. He showed her which of the 11 had honey to spare and which had only enough for themselves. Of the 11 alive, he judged 6 were fit to take from that spring, and no more. They worked in the cool of the evening, when the bees were home and quiet. Hester wore her veil of laundry net still, sewn to the brim of an old hat, and Reuben laughed at it the first time. And then he stopped laughing, because it worked. Better than mine ever was, he said. You've a head for it, missus. They lifted the first skep down. He cut the comb with a long knife warmed in a pail of hot water, and the smell came up out of it, and Hester stood there with her hands full of comb and did not move for a moment. She had smelled soap and lye and wet wool for 9 years and more. This was none of those. This was the whole summer of a wall 100 years old, come out into her 2 hands at once. Don't stand there gone soft, Reuben said, but gently, it'll set on you. Strain it while it's warm. She strained it through clean laundry cloth, the same cloth she dried gentlefolk's linen on, and it ran gold into her crocks, and when it was done she had honey enough to fill the shelf in her little house twice over. And there was the wax. Reuben showed her that too. The cappings and the old comb, boiled soft and poured off through cloth, and skimmed and poured again, till it came out clean and yellow and hard, cakes of it stacked like small bright cheeses on her table. That, said Reuben, and he tapped a cake of it with one bent finger, that's the money. Folk think it's the honey. It ain't. The honey's sweet and the honey's dear, but the wax is what the great houses want, and the church wants it worse. There's never enough good wax. Never has been. He looked at her. You take that to a man who buys for the diocese, and you don't say a word about £6, and you watch his face. She did not do it as a scheme. I want you to understand that, because it matters to the whole of what comes after. She did not carry that wax to market thinking of Fenwick, or of the vestry, or of getting back at any man for anything. She carried it because Reuben told her to, and because a widow with a shelf of good wax carries it to the man who buys wax. That is all. The quietest thing she ever did was the thing that undid 12 gentlemen, and she did it with no more in her heart than a wish to know what it was worth. She put the cakes in a laundry basket, under a clean cloth, and she walked them to the market town on the Saturday. The man who bought wax for the diocese was called Hollis. Warden Hollis, churchwarden, a heavy, careful man with an apron and a set of brass scales he trusted more than he trusted most men. He was buying wax that morning from 2 or 3 folk, poor stuff, dark and dirty, and paying poor prices for it. And he'd near sent her off before he'd looked, for he saw a laundry basket and a woman in a widow's cap, and thought, more washing come to the wrong stall. Then she took the cloth off. Warden Hollis stopped. He picked up one cake. He turned it to the light. He pressed his thumbnail into the edge of it and smelled it, and he set it on his brass scale, and he weighed it, and he weighed the next, and he was quiet the whole while, and the 2 men behind her in the queue went quiet too, watching him be quiet. "Where," said Warden Hollis at last, "did you come by this?" "I keep bees," said Hester. "You keep bees?" He looked at her over the scales. "Missus, I've bought wax in this town 19 year. I've not had a cake of this colour across this table in 5 of them. This is prime cake. This is altar wax. He set the last one down. How much have you got?" "That's the whole of it." This spring. He said it the way Reuben had said waste ground, tasting it. He named her a price. He named it slow, so she'd hear it whole, and it was a price that made the man behind her in the queue draw his breath in sharp. It was more than Hester Coombe took in half a year of washing and mangling and carrying baskets in the rain. For one basket, for one spring, off 6 of 11 stocks. She did not colour. She had not coloured when the 12 men smiled at her over 6 coins on the vestry table, and she did not colour now. She only said, "And come the autumn there'll be more." "Come the autumn," said Warden Hollis, "you bring it to me first, and I'll take every cake. The church can't get enough of it, and I'll not haggle you. But I'll ask you again, for I'm a curious man." He leaned on his scales. "Where does a laundress get an apiary?" And Hester told him. "Not all of it, but enough." A walled garden she'd bought for the wall, to dry her linen. A far wall she'd cleared through the winter, 40 little stone cupboards built into the stone in 2 long courses, and skeps in them, and bees still flying after 9 years shut away. 40 bowls, said Warden Hollis softly. In one wall, 40, 11 alive. He looked at her a long moment. Then he said the thing that started the word travelling. He said it not to shame anyone. He said it because it was simply true, and it astonished him, and a man says a true, astonishing thing out loud, whether he means to or not. "That's the old Marlbrook apiary," he said. "That's the Almshouse stocks. Good God, missus, half the altars in this deanery burned Marlbrook wax when I was a boy. That garden carried the whole poorhouse. Do you not know what you're standing on?" There it was again. The same words Reuben had used at the humming wall. You don't know what you're standing on. She was starting to. Word travels in a market town the way honey runs off a warm knife. By the following week it had run the 4 miles and more to Farleigh Coombe, and it had run to a gentleman solicitor named Josiah Fenwick, who had signed a conveyance one December morning and thought no more of it than a man thinks of a fly he's brushed off his sleeve. What Fenwick heard was not the whole of it. What Fenwick heard was that the washerwoman's waste ground was turning money. That was all. And a man like Fenwick, hearing that, does not think, how glad I am for the poor widow. He thinks, there has been a mistake, and I must find where. So Josiah Fenwick did a thing he had never once done in 9 years. He went and looked at the accounts. He went into the old Almshouse chest, the parish records, the trust books that had been closed and tied with tape 2 years since, when the Almshouse shut its doors. And he read back through them, year on year, 100 years of a small charity's small money, and he found a line he had never noticed, because a man closing a failing charity looks at what it costs, not at what it once earned. He found the apiary line, skep honey and rendered wax, sold each Michaelmas, and the money set against one thing, plain, in the old careful hand, year after year after year. Coal, the pensioners' coal. The fires of the poor of Marlbrook, paid for, 100 years running, by the bees on the south wall. And Josiah Fenwick, chairman of the trust that closed the Almshouse, sat in his office with that book open, and he understood, slowly and coldly, what the 12 of them had done. They had sold the one thing the charity owned that had never failed it. They had let it go for £6 as waste ground, because not one of them had ever, in all their stewardship, walked the length of their own boundary to the far wall. A better man would have been ashamed. Fenwick was not a better man. Fenwick was a solicitor. He thought, this can be undone. He came to the gate himself, first, before ever the lawyer's letters started. He came in his good coat on a fine June evening, and he found Hester at the wall in her veil, and the row of 40 bowls behind her, and the air thick and gold with the sound of them. "Mrs. Coombe," he said, pleasant as anything, "you've done wonders. Truly, nobody thought that ground could be brought round." "You didn't think it could be anything?" she said. "Not sharp. Just true." Well, he smiled. He had a good smile, and he knew it. A charity ought to have its garden, don't you think? It seems a pity, a piece of old Almshouse land in private hands. I'd like to put it right. I'll give you £50 for it this evening, and you'll have made a handsome turn on your 6. He let that sit. £50, Mrs. Coombe, to a woman in your position. "No," said Hester. Fenwick's smile did not move, but something behind it did. 120, he said. And that was the moment, I think, that Hester Coombe knew exactly what she had. Because a man does not offer £120 for waste ground. A man offers £120 for a thing he has finally understood he threw away, and wants back before the whole parish understands it too. "No, Mr. Fenwick," she said, "it dries my linen a treat. That wall." I'll keep it." He went away. He did not slam the gate. He was too much a gentleman to slam a gate. But he went away, and the pleasant part of it went away with him, and what came next came on paper. Before the lawyers, though, before the worst of it, there was a kinder thing. And I'll give it to you here because Hester earned it, and because you'll want it before the vestry. She could not work the whole apiary alone, not with the autumn harvest coming and 11 stocks and the strong ones throwing swarms. She'd need hands to hive. Reuben was 78 and could teach, but could not lift. So Hester thought of the old book and the names in it, and she thought of who else had once worked this wall. She thought of Mercy Yeo. She had carried washing free to Mercy Yeo in the next village for years, an old almshouse widow turned out to a damp cottage at Wexcombe, and never once in all that carrying had it crossed either of their minds that Mercy had a thing Hester needed. But Mercy Yeo, before the almshouse closed, before she was old, had run the skep harvest at Marlbrook, had strained the honey and pressed the cakes and known the swarm days by heart. Hester walked to Wexcombe and told her, and old Mercy Yeo sat down in her damp little cottage and put her apron to her face and cried, the way Reuben had cried at the gate, because she had thought no one in the world remembered that she had ever been useful for anything at all. "They're alive?" she kept saying. "The stocks are alive? After all this while?" 11 of them, said Hester, "and I can't work them right without you. Reuben says you knew the harvest better than any." Reuben Tucker. Mercy laughed through it. "Is old Reuben living?" "Living, and vexed at me twice a day, and happy as I ever saw a man." Mercy Yeo came, and she found, in her own turning-out village and the next, one more of the dispersed almsfolk who'd had a hand in the old apiary, a widow woman with knuckles gone to knots who could no longer lift a skep but could sit all day at a table and strain honey clean through cloth. And the 3 old ones and Hester worked that autumn wall together, and it was, Reuben said, more like the old days than he'd ever thought to see again before they put him in the ground. That was the tenderness of it. That was the thing the money never touched. The charity had scattered these people to 3 villages and forgotten them, and a laundress with £6 gathered a few of them back to a warm wall and made them needful again. Meter that however you like. In my book it counts for more than the wax did, but the wax was what the 12 men understood, and the 12 men moved. The letter came from Fenwick's own firm. It was long and it was cold, and it used the words the law uses. It said the walled garden was charity land. It said it had been sold at a gross undervalue through the trustees' own error. It said the Charity Commission's return fell due at Lady Day, and that the lost income must be recovered or accounted for, and that unless Mrs. Coombe would sell the land back to the trust at a fair price, the trust would move to have the conveyance set aside altogether. Set aside, as though her whole winter had never happened, as though the wall would forget her. And here is the ugly part, and I'll not pretend it away. The parish turned. While it was a washerwoman on waste ground, the parish had laughed at her. Now it was a washerwoman standing between a poor charity and money the poor charity was owed, and that is a different story, and folk who'd sneered at her spade now shook their heads and said it wasn't right. A labouring woman keeping what belonged to the almshouse, keeping the pensioner's own income for herself. They forgot she'd found it. They forgot nobody else had troubled to look. Money had come into the tale, and money turns a parish like weather turns milk. For a fortnight it looked bad. It looked, honestly, as though the 12 men who had never walked to the far wall would reach out from their table and take back the thing she'd dug out of the brambles with her own 2 frozen hands, and be thanked for it. And then Hester Coombe went to the vestry. She did not go alone, and she did not go empty-handed, but the thing she carried in the pocket of her apron, folded flat, and it weighed nothing, and it was heavier than the whole of the south wall. They gave her the vestry on a Thursday, more to be done with her than to hear her. The same room, the same 12 men, Josiah Fenwick at the head of the table with his solicitor's face on, and Reverend Aldous Pring beside him with his hands folded, the same Pring who had rebuked her from the lane for keeping stock above her station. And along the side, invited by neither of them, sat Warden Hollis with his apron off and his good coat on, because Hester had asked him, and a churchwarden goes where he's asked. And in the corner, in his best coat, 78 years old, thin as a rail and straight as he could manage, sat Reuben Tucker, last beeman of Marlbrook, who had not been inside that room since the day they turned him out of it. Fenwick opened smooth. He always opened smooth. He spoke of the Trust's regret, of an honest error, of the duty a charity owed its beneficiaries, of the fair price the Trust was willing, even now, to pay to set matters right. He spoke as though it were already settled, and only the signing left. He spoke, in short, as though Hester Coombe were a small difficulty to be tidied, the way he'd tidied the whole almshouse into the ground. The plain fact, Mrs. Coombe, he finished, is that charity land cannot be sold at an undervalue. The law will not have it. The sale was an error, and errors are corrected. I'd urge you to take the Trust's fair offer and spare us all the courts. Undervalue, said Hester. An undervalue? Yes, grossly so, as it now appears. Who set the value, Mr. Fenwick? He paused. I beg your pardon? £6, said Hester. Who set that price? Was it me? Did I name it, or did the 12 of you name it, and write it down, and seal it? And she took the folded paper out of her apron pocket, and she unfolded it on the vestry table in front of them all, and it was the conveyance, the Trust's own instrument. Sealed and signed, 12 men's names to it, and Josiah Fenwick's at the top, in Josiah Fenwick's own hand. Read it, said Hester. Read your own words, sir. Read what the garden is, that you sold me. It's writ there, in your hand. I've had a clerk read it me a dozen times, so I'd have it right. She put her worn finger on the line. Read it to the room. Fenwick did not read it. Fenwick had gone the colour of tallow, so it was Warden Hollis, in the end, who reached over and drew the paper to him and read it out in his heavy, careful market voice, so every one of the 12 should hear it. The plot of ground lying east of the almshouse, being waste ground of no value to the charity, sold this day for the sum of £6. Waste ground of no value to the charity, said Hollis again, and set the paper down. The room was very quiet. There's your undervalue, sirs, said Hester into the quiet. You can't plead I got it under its worth. You wrote its worth. You put your names to its worth. Waste ground of no value. 12 gentlemen sealed that. I paid the price you set on the thing you said was worthless. 6 coins for £6, 1 for every year it lay unlet, and you smiled at me while I counted it out. You can't now come and tell the Commission it was worth 100 years of coal money. Not with that in your own hand. Either it was worth nothing, like you swore, or you swore false to be rid of it. It can't be both, Mr. Fenwick. Which was it? Josiah Fenwick opened his mouth and shut it, and did not answer, because there was no answer that did not hang him one way or the other. His own contempt, written and sealed, barred the door he'd meant to come back through. A man cannot say a thing is worthless to sell it cheap, and then say it was priceless to take it back. The law he'd leaned on leaned the other way now, and it leaned on him. And in case any man here thinks the widow's talking money she's dreamed up, Hester said, I brought the man who buys it. Warden Hollis stood. He was not a man who enjoyed a scene, and he did not make one. He simply told the vestry, in pounds and shillings, what a properly worked apiary of that size yielded a year in honey and in prime wax, at the price the diocese paid and would go on paying. He named the standing order. He named the shortage. He named the figure the old almshouse had lived on, and then he said, plain, that it was no guess of his, and no boast of hers. That's not her claim, gentlemen, said Hollis. That's the price. The market names it, not the woman. She could stand here and say nothing at all, and the wax would still be worth what I've told you. I'd buy every cake tomorrow. So would 3 great houses and half the churches in this deanery. You didn't sell a bramble patch. He sat down. You sold that. And now Josiah Fenwick learned the last of his lesson, and he learned it on his feet, because Hester was not finished with him. "You've never seen it," she said. "Have you? In all these years? You signed it away, and you'd not have known it from any other wall in the parish. Come and see it, Mr. Fenwick. Come and see what you sold. All of you. It's a fair evening. I don't know what made them go. Shame, maybe, or the churchwarden getting up, or old Reuben rising in his corner. But they went. 12 gentlemen and a solicitor and a vicar, out of the vestry and down the lane in the long June light, to a gate they'd owned for years and never once walked through, and into the walled garden and along the cleared path to the far wall. And they stood before the 40 bowls, 2 long courses of stone cupboards set into the warm south wall 100 years and more, each one built by a man whose name Reuben knew. The straw skeps in them, the 11 that lived, humming, the sound of them filling the whole evening, gold in the low sun. 12 feet of wall those men had ridden past for 9 years, and never turned their heads. Josiah Fenwick stood in front of it, with his own sealed paper still in his hand, and he did not say anything at all, and for once in his life there was nothing smooth in him to say. It was Reuben Tucker who spoke. The old man walked the row the way he'd walked it for Hester that first afternoon, and he laid his hand on the stone between the niches, and he named them. Not for the gentlemen. He didn't look at the gentlemen, he named them for the men who'd built them. This one, Amos Ford set. Turned out to Wexcombe, died there the first winter. This one, Old Gully. Before my time. This one, my own grandfather set his hand to, 100 year gone. On down the wall. Every one of these, some poor old man of this house built with his own hands, so the house should have coal, and you turned the last of us out to 3 villages, and you sold the wall we built for £6 as waste ground. He came to the end of the row, and he stopped, and he looked, at last, at Josiah Fenwick. "No value," you wrote. "Well, here's the value, sir. It's been humming here the whole time. You just never come to hear it." And Reverend Aldous Pring, who had rebuked her from the lane, who had called a labouring woman's keeping of stock unseemly, stood at the wall with his hands no longer folded, because Warden Hollis, quiet, had told him a thing on the walk down. The altar candles. The candles the vicar lit over his own services, week on week, that he'd bought through the churchwarden and never asked the source of. They were rendered from her wax. From Marlbrook wax. The man who thought her trade beneath the parish had been saying grace by the light of it, and consecrating by it all this while, and never known. Pring did not rebuke anyone that evening. No one was ruined. I want you to see that clearly, for it's the whole shape of the thing. No man was struck down, no scheme sprung, no revenge taken. The 12 gentlemen were simply walked to the far wall and shown, in the plain gold evening light, exactly what they had thrown away, because they were too grand to do the work or walk the ground. That was all the punishment there was. It was enough. It was more than enough. They dropped the matter. There was nothing to be done with the conveyance but let it stand, and they let it stand, because Fenwick's own words held the door shut against every one of them. Hester Coombe kept her garden, she kept her wall and her 40 bowls and her 11 stocks, and she kept the trade, and she worked it with Reuben's teaching and Mercy's hands, and it dried her linen a treat besides, 12 feet of warm south stone, just as she'd wanted from the start. And then she did the last thing, and it was the thing that turned the whole parish back to her side, though she didn't do it for that either. Out of the first full year's profit, unasked, unbidden, telling no one till it was done, Hester Coombe took the old coal money, the same sum the bees had paid the almshouse every year for 100 years, and she sent it round the 3 villages to the dispersed almsfolk. To Reuben. To Mercy Yeo. to the widow with the knotted hands. To the old ones the charity had scattered and forgotten. Coal money, for their own fires, from the wall they'd built, restored to them by a laundress's hand when the trust that owed it had let it die. The reward for the one who'd read the wall, and the ruin of the man's contempt writ in his own hand, both landed in one parish in one summer. And after that, nobody in Farleigh Coombe said a word against Hester Coombe again. Let me leave you where it ends. The year after. A warm July afternoon. The 40 bowls worked again. Every one Reuben could bring back to life, brought back, the south wall humming the whole length of it. Gentlefolk's linen dries fast on the lines strung the length of the warm stone, whiter and quicker than any yard in the parish, and the custom comes to her now faster than she can take it. Inside the gate, at a table in the sun, Mercy Yeo strains honey clean through laundry cloth, and the widow with the knotted hands presses the cakes, and Reuben Tucker sits in a chair against the warm wall with his eyes half shut, naming the swarms as they come, telling anybody near which stock through which, 100 years of it still in his old head. Josiah Fenwick resigned from the trust that autumn. They say he walks his boundaries now, all of them, to the far corners. A little late, but he walks them. And Reverend Pring buys his candles from her, at the market price, same as any man, and lights his altar with them, and says grace over the light. I'm told he means it. The important men did not sell a bramble patch. That's the whole of it. They sold the thing that had quietly fed them for 100 years, and they sold it as waste ground of no value, because not one of the 12 had ever done the work, or walked the ground, or stopped to hear a wall hum in the sun. So before you go, walk your own ground. Walk it to the far wall, every foot of it, before you let any grand man tell you what it's worth. And comment the county or the country you're watching from. I'd dearly love to see how far a story about £6 of pennies has travelled.